February 1995, a wet winter night in Raleigh. Headlights smear across damp asphalt. In a block of anonymous apartments, a single window glows late into the small hours. Keys click, fingers hover over a keyboard, a face lit by code and the blue light of habit. Outside, vans hum and tires crunch as a tactical team forms a perimeter. Inside, breath catches. The door rams inward. Command voices crack across metal. For one instant, the world compresses into the sound of a single phrase. FBI, get down. And the man at the screen raises his hands. On paper, it looks like an ending, a notorious outlaw finally boxed up and hauled away. In truth, it is only the most dramatic punctuation in a long and complicated sentence, the moment a legend pauses to be rewritten. The bigger story is the slow-burning arc that began with bus tickets and teenage jokes, then threaded into social engineering, into access, into a reputation that both terrified and fascinated a country learning how to live with its own digital shadow. The prankster phase. Kevin Mitnick's first victories were small and cheap, a conversation here, a mistaken assumption there. He learned that the world unlocks for a confident voice more readily than for perfect code. At 12, he engineered free bus rides by persuading a driver that he needed a ticket punch for a school project. At 17, he walked into a Pacific Bell office, picked up confidential manuals from an unlocked closet, and walked back out as if he'd merely been retrieving a phone. These were not crimes of hunger, but of curiosity and demonstration. To Kevin, a closed system was a puzzle, and the puzzle was sweetest when everyone else insisted the pieces were glued. Those early infractions carried a lightness, the exhilaration of bending rules without breaking the world. They were also lessons in method. Social engineering became his craft, the patient art of building trust where none existed and moving a conversation to the point where the other person handed over the key. He found it far easier to speak his way past a locked door than to smash through it with code. In basements and schoolyards, the telephone network became a private playground. Voicemail boxes were explored, call routing was toyed with. An FBI agent's home number once rang through a flirtatious motel clerk as a prank, and the group howled at the audacity. Every laugh taught him the same thing. People expect ordinary behavior, and ordinary behavior is the mask that lets you pass. Even mischief has consequences. When his Pacific Bell stunt showed how simply trust could be harvested, Kevin found himself in front of a judge who described him as addicted to tampering. The law hoped a year in juvenile rehabilitation would be a reset. To Kevin, it was merely a pause. The thrill remained, the sweet friction between what was permitted and what was possible, and his hands found new puzzles when he was allowed back in the world. Hacking giants and becoming a ghost. Adolescence grayed into adulthood, and Mitnick's appetites grew with his knowledge. Small playgrounds were replaced by mammoth institutions, telephone companies, software houses, defense contractors. He discovered a scalable truth. Where complex organizations used processes and polite habit to function, those same processes often created predictable openings. He learned to value the human hinge more than the brittle algorithm. One cold call could be worth more than a night of brute force attempts. The DECs and Motorola's of the world did not always meet him with barbed wire. Polite engineers answered polite questions. Help desks created test accounts for a voice that sounded like a colleague. Mitnick's greatest success was often a bluff performed with conviction. He would call, impersonate a known engineer, explain a problem, and watch the gate open. The astonishment was never just technical, it was moral. How easily a system designed to serve people could be undone by the way people are trained to help one another. The rewards escalated. He copied source code from major vendors as if it were a public library, assembled software like trophies, and cataloged the architectures that most companies assumed were private. This was not a career built on greed. It was constructed on curiosity, power, and a growing conviction that systems were only as strong as the humans who kept them. He collected knowledge the way other people collected stamps, and every acquisition hardened his reputation. In the late 80s, the consequences arrived. arrests, charges, and a prosecutor's hyperbole that captured the public imagination. It was argued that a single hacker could whistle into a phone and launch missiles, an absurd image that nevertheless fit a population nervous about technology it did not understand. Courts reacted harshly. Bail was denied. Months in solitary followed. The public narrative hardened into caricature. Mitnick the monster, Mitnick the national threat. He left prison scarred and ordered away from modems. The sentence was meant to teach him boundaries. Instead, for a man who had built habit into identity, the prohibition was a new kind of hunger. He could have stopped. Instead, he slipped back into the world, now practiced at hiding. Under assumed names, he rented apartments, took legitimate day jobs, and at night returned to the systems he loved. He moved like a ghost between cities and between identities. The tools he used were not always exotic. Cloned cell phones, cheap handset reprogramming, radio scanners, and patience. He used burner phones with numbers borrowed from other people, dropped them when compromised, and listened to the very people hunting him. He turned the apparatus of law enforcement into a broadcast he could tune into, reading voicemail and monitoring frequencies. In return, the FBI watched a phantom that seemed to be everywhere and nowhere. As his myth spread, admiration cultivated a counterculture of support. Hackers painted his portrait across the dawn of the nascent internet. Some regarded him as a folk hero, a small man who had embarrassed vast institutions. Others saw danger. A single figure highlighted the fragility of critical systems, and the more the myth swelled, the harder the hand that would eventually reach for him. The fall and redemption. Every legend bends toward an event that proves the story is not invincible. For Mitnick, it was Christmas Day, 1994, not because of a holiday tryst, but because of a miscalculation. He breached the systems of a man who was not merely a researcher, but an infuriatingly good tracker. Tsutomu Shimomura, a security expert who treated intrusion as a personal affront. Where Mitnick had often attacked corporations, larger, faceless entities, he had now taken on an individual with expertise, pride, and a willingness to fight back. Shimomura combed through logs, followed breadcrumbs, and contacted the FBI with a focused determination that blurred the line between professional duty and personal vendetta. He traced connections, analyzed hops, and with law enforcement, he turned investigative tools of direction finding and radio triangulation into a manhunt. For the first time, the hunter had a hunter who could think like him. It is bitterly cinematic how small technical details became decisive. A pattern of a cell number lighting up in the night, repeated routine timings, and the tire tracks of human habit coalesced. Direction-finding vans rolled, antennal arrays homed in on a signal, and late in the night of February 15, 1995, agents moved in. The door rammed, the keyboard went cold. For Kevin Mitnick, the chase ended with hands up and a set of charges that would finally break the myth in the legal system's favor. Yet the legal drama was only the interlude to a far longer conversation. The spectacle of Mitnick in handcuffs ignited a fierce public debate. Television and print demanded simple categories, scoundrel or misunderstood genius, while professionals probed more difficult questions. What did his success say about organizational negligence? How much of cybersecurity was technology and how much was trust? The courtroom could punish a person. It could not instantly cure the systemic habits that had let him in. His punishment was severe, but the arc bends in strange ways. After arrests, trials, and years in custody, and after a period in which courts forbade him from touching networked machines, Kevin Mitnick's story did an ironic about-face. The same mind that had exploited the weakness of human trust began to teach about it. He stood before Senate committees, not as an enemy to be excised, but as an expert who could describe precisely how a confident voice opens locked doors. He authored books that read partly like confession, partly like warning, and he eventually turned to legitimate consultancy, helping firms find and patch the gaps his younger self had relied on. There is a moral twist here that refuses tidy endings. For some, the conversion was redemption. The fox became the guard, and the lessons he offered were founded on the kind of knowledge only a trespasser could possess. For others, the transition was less comfortable. How can one fully absolve a man whose curiosity led to sustained breaches of trust, even if those breaches illuminated systemic weakness? The legacy, in any case, is complicated. Kevin Mitnick's narrative did more than entertain. It forced institutions to reckon with a simple cretin problem. Systems are made by humans, and humans error. Corporations and governments learned the necessity of training, of auditing culture, and of designing processes that assume the worst of social engineering rather than the best of human courtesy. The field of cybersecurity grew up through that very tension, the knowledge that a clever voice can be more lethal than a clever script. In the quiet epilogue, there's a different lesson for storytellers and for technologists alike. The tale of a marvelously gifted and dangerously restless person who slipped between lines shows us how much of modern safety depends on mundane trust. The receptionist who vouches for a stranger, the engineer who grants a test account without a second thought, the administrator who believes a confident voice on the line. Mitnick's story illustrates that defenses cannot be merely digital, they must be humanly humble. Final image. A slow pull away from a courtroom photograph into a bookshop shelf where a copy of Ghost in the Wires sits between a manual on network hardening and a memoir. The camera rests on the spine for a beat, then moves to a darkened office window where a new generation of analysts trains their eyes on dashboards and on the small, stubborn item labeled human behavior. The voiceover closes quietly. The man who once made the phone system seem small taught us the harder job, how to make people, processes, and code less fallible. The legend remains, but the work is now to build systems that make the next audacious prankster less effective and less mythic, and not the stuff of national panic.